Terran Voss dropped his dented gear pack onto the rimstone bench that circled Virelya's last functioning public cistern. The recycled air of his ship had left his lungs tasting like stale iron. Now, in the cool open sky of this frontier moon, he felt oxygen hit his bloodstream like a drug. Virelya was wilder than he remembered. The market street twisted out beyond the basin, lined with wooden frames covered in leather awnings, each pulsing with smells: fermented spice fruit, sun-roasted starch roots, meat grilled over glimmering coals. The air buzzed with low-tech life, hover sleds jittering past, barter chants in a dozen dialects, the occasional pop of antique combustion rigs running on jungle ethanol. He planned to unload his cargo: 2 crates of refurbished drone cores and 1 unstable fusion welder salvaged from a defunct orbital dock, and get out. Quietly. No questions. No trail. But the world had other plans. Terran sat, stretched his legs, and exhaled for the first time in weeks. He hadn't been this still since leaving the ruins of Darax's station. And stillness always brought danger. A long shadow fell over him. Not a silhouette but presence, felt before it was seen. He looked up. A woman stood before him. Tall, sleek, and impossibly still. Orange fur caught in the golden light like living fire, and her face held the symmetry of something designed to lure rather than comfort. Her ears flicked once. Gold eyes stared directly into him, not like a stranger, but like a hunter. Without a word, she dropped down onto the stone beside him. "Do you mind?" Terran muttered. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for his forearm. "What the hell?" Her fingers were warm. Clawed. The moment her muzzle dipped to his skin, Terran flinched, but too late. Her bite was quick. Sharp. A flash of pain shot up his arm like lightning. Then heat. Pressure. She licked the puncture once, sealing it with the efficiency of ritual. "Mine," she said in rough trade tongue. Her voice was velvet wrapped around gravel. Terran froze. The market stopped. Terran stared down at the twin crescents on his arm, already beginning to throb with a warmth that felt too deliberate to be a normal wound. The bite wasn't deep, but it pulsed like it had a heartbeat of its own. Around them, the square shifted. Movement stilled. Voices dropped. Chairs scraped backward from tables as if distance might shield onlookers from whatever had just occurred. He looked back at her. She hadn't moved. Still seated beside him with her tail curled across the bench like it belonged there, like he belonged there now too. Her gaze stayed forward, but her ears flicked slightly, catching every whisper as they started to ripple through the crowd. "You've got a real aggressive way of saying hello," he muttered, trying to inject some humor into his shaking voice. "I was just here to sell parts." Still no response. He grabbed a strip of cloth from his pocket and wrapped the wound, clenching his jaw as each tug of the knot sent another jolt of heat crawling up his veins. It didn't feel like venom. It felt like a claim, intentional and public. The surrounding silence thickened. Someone muttered in a dialect he didn't know, but the word "bound" came through clear enough. 2 armored locals stepped forward. Beastskin, like her, though rougher, more broad-shouldered than sleek. One had a coil bow slung across his back. The other wore a bone-studded cloak that rattled as he crossed his arms and glared. "Kayla," the bigger one growled. That was her name. She stood now, slow and measured. Her head tilted slightly to the side, acknowledging the male without deference. Terran, still seated, felt smaller by comparison. Not because she was larger, but because the weight of attention had shifted to him. Again. "What is this?" the second warrior barked, gesturing at Terran. "Unchallenged claim? Without rights?" "The council. I'll speak with the matriarch," Kayla interrupted. Her voice, this time, carried not just strength but finality. "Before dusk." The words dropped like flintstones into water. The 2 warriors tensed, exchanged glances, then stepped back with visible reluctance. Terran stood, slinging his pack over his shoulder. "Listen, Kayla, I didn't exactly volunteer for whatever this was. So maybe you could just explain." But she was already walking. and the path through the square cleared before her like the parting of tide. Terran cursed under his breath and followed, nursing his throbbing arm. Around him, whispers swirled like sand in a dust storm. The bite had changed something. He didn't know what, but he could feel it. And so could everyone else. The village beyond the square curled like a spiral into the upper ridges of the valley, structures woven from hide, stone, and darkwood rising at odd angles along sloped paths. Torches glowed even in daylight here, casting flickers of amber across hand-painted symbols and bone charms that hung from doorframes. Kayla walked ahead, not speaking, her gait graceful yet alert. Her tail swished behind her in slow arcs, and each step radiated certainty. Terran followed, less certain, the bandage on his forearm growing stiff with dried blood. Every few strides someone would glance out from a doorway or window, only to vanish when they caught his eye. He hated this feeling. Not the pain. Not the mystery. But the isolation, the kind that screamed you don't belong here even louder than the silence did. They reached the crest of a stone stairway that ended at a low building half buried in the hillside. Vines clung to the arched roof, and smoke coiled upward from a circular chimney. The door wasn't a door at all, just a thick curtain of stitched pelts etched with clawmark sigils. Kayla held it aside. Terran hesitated. "You sure you want to keep this going?" "Because I'm really good at walking away from complicated situations." Her eyes met his. "Not cold. Not warm. Something else." "I know," she said. "But I didn't bite someone who runs." It wasn't praise. It was fact. He ducked through the threshold. Inside, the space was dim and full of scent, spice stash, fire-roasted root oil, something wild and musky that clung to the walls like memory. Beads hung from the rafters, catching firelight, and a long crescent bench carved from a single obsidian slab curved around a hearth pit filled with low-burning embers. There were elders seated on that bench. Not many, 6 in total, but each bore the weight of ages in their posture and eyes. Their fur was streaked with silver, marked with scars and bone-tied braids. One of them, the matriarch, sat at the center. Her muzzle was paler than Kayla's, her golden eyes dulled by time, but no less sharp. Kayla dropped to one knee and bowed her head. Terran did not. He remained standing, letting his silence speak whatever uncertain respect he could offer. His heart thudded like a misfiring reactor. The matriarch spoke first, not to him, but to Kayla. "Why him?" Kayla's answer came in her native growl, deep and rhythmic. Terran caught only fragments, but the translator seated to the side, an adolescent Vulpine with pale orange fur, spoke quietly after each line. "I saw the way he watched," Kayla said. "I saw how he did not reach for a weapon when surprised. He carries humor like armor, but it does not dull his instincts. He survives not by force, but by understanding." Terran blinked. That wasn't what he expected. The matriarch turned her gaze to him. "And you, outsider? You wear the mark. Do you reject it?" Terran looked down at the cloth on his arm. It had already darkened, the puncture now crusted in dry red and faintly outlined by bruising. He could lie. Say it meant nothing. Say he'd been taken by surprise. But he hadn't. He looked the matriarch in the eye. "I didn't come here for a bond," he said. "But I don't run from what finds me." The matriarch studied him for a long moment. Then she gave her verdict. "The bond must be tested. You will join Kayla in the trial of Fire Hollow. Return with proof, or not at all." The fire cracked once, as if sealing the decree. By the time they left the matriarch's court, the sky over Virelya had deepened into a rich violet, the twin moons bleeding silver over the ridgeline. Terran's thoughts spun like a busted NAV core. A trial? For what? To prove a bond he never asked for? And yet, he hadn't said no. Kayla led him back through narrow paths behind the village, into quieter territory. The slope leveled into a dense grove of spiral trees, thick bark trunks twisting skyward like ancient spears, their leaves glowing faintly with bioluminescent sap. Birds called in echoing shrieks overhead, sharp and lonely. They reached a small rise where a cache of gear had been laid out beneath a camouflage net, 2 packs, a pair of coil bows, climbing harnesses, and several cylindrical scent markers. Kayla crouched beside it and began assembling her kit in silence. Terran broke the quiet. "You're really not going to explain this trial thing to me? You accepted the mark?" she said without looking up. "You stand with me now. The trial of Fire Hollow is tradition. Every new bond is tested, especially one made without right or forewarning." "Great," he muttered. "So this is your clan's idea of relationship counseling?" Kayla paused just long enough to glance up at him. Her expression unreadable. "You can still run," she said. He sighed and dropped to one knee beside her, checking the straps on the climbing gear. "Tried running before. Doesn't usually fix anything." That earned him something, a faint flick of her ears and a huff that might have been a suppressed laugh. Or a warning. "When the twin moons align over the Spire Ridge," she said, pointing east, "we move. Fire Hollow doesn't wait past its window. What exactly are we hunting?" Kayla stood and slung the coil bow over her shoulder. "A flame-back WIRM. Only one left in this valley. Big. Old. Smart. You don't kill it. You take a scale. If it bleeds, we fail." Terran squinted up at the stars. "That's it. Just sneak up to a prehistoric lizard and shave a piece off its side while it naps?" She looked at him then, fully. Her eyes were brighter under moonlight, amber gold with slits that tightened when she was focused. "You're not being tested on whether you succeed," she said. "You're being tested on whether you survive beside me." For once, Terran didn't joke. He nodded and said quietly, "Then I won't get in your way." She handed him a pack, brushed past him, and vanished into the trees with barely a sound. And for the second time that day, Terran followed her into the unknown. They moved through the wilds like shadows cast from opposite stars, Kayla silent and swift, ears twitching to sounds Terran could barely hear, and him just trying not to trip over a root or crunch through dried leaves like some off-world fool. The forest gave way to broken shale and rust-colored clay as they descended into a dry basin that stank faintly of sulfur and minerals. The wind hissed low through jagged stone like it was trying to whisper secrets to anyone bold, or foolish, enough to listen. Kayla knelt at the edge of a ravine and tapped 2 claws against a chunk of scorched stone. "Flameback slept here," she murmured. "Maybe a day ago. Shed a scale." Terran crouched beside her and spotted it, a shard of glossy red-black keratin, still warm to the touch. He whistled under his breath. "Looks like obsidian fused with dragahide." Kayla didn't smile. "That's its armor. The older ones turn magma into a skin." Terran exhaled slowly. "Great. So we're hunting a fireproof snake the size of a dropship." "We're not hunting it," she corrected. "We're surviving it." He nodded. That felt more accurate. They advanced deeper into the gorge, scaling the inner walls with climbing hooks while Kayla laid scent-suppressant gel across their gear. The temperature rose as they dropped lower, like the earth itself was breathing heat. Cracks in the stone emitted a soft glow, as if magma still pooled deep in Virelya's bones. Eventually, they reached a narrow ledge overlooking a sinkhole filled with thick brambles and thermal mist. Kayla signaled him to freeze. Her ears went rigid. Then he saw it too. Down below, half coiled around a collapsed stone pillar, lay the flame-back WIRM. Its scales rippled like molten glass over muscle, and its nostrils flared with each breath, releasing little bursts of steam. It wasn't asleep. But it wasn't moving either. Resting. Waiting. Kayla pointed toward the base of its flank, where a scale had recently sloughed off. A soft, exposed patch beneath. Just wide enough for a careful extraction. She handed Terran a specialized blade, curved, dull on one edge, treated with mineral suppressant so it wouldn't spark. He took it carefully. "I'll distract," she whispered. "You cut." "You sure?" he asked, eyeing the beast. "Because that thing looks like it could eat both of us and burp steam." She leaned close enough for him to feel the heat radiating off her fur. I trust your hands, she said. Don't make me regret it. Then she vanished down the rocks, a blaze of orange and silence. Terran took a breath, gripped the blade tighter, and began to climb toward the WYRM's exposed side, where fire slept just beneath the skin. Terran descended slowly, every muscle in his body clenched like a tripwire. The blade in his hand felt absurdly small, like trying to carve a boulder with a spoon. The WYRM lay beneath him, shimmering in the heat haze, its massive ribs rising and falling in slow, deceptive calm. Kayla struck first. From across the basin, a flare ignited with a loud pop, releasing a cloud of scent-distracting smoke and a blinding flash of green phosphor. The WYRM reacted instantly, roaring, a sound like earth grinding against itself. Its serpentine body uncoiled violently, molten scales refracting the light as it swung toward the distraction. Terran moved. He dropped the last few meters and rolled, coming up beside the exposed patch of soft flesh beneath its frontmost scales. He didn't hesitate. He couldn't. The knife slid in with more resistance than he'd hoped, the membrane thick, pulsing with heat. He twisted, slid under the edge, and peeled a single scale, hot and slick and heavy as a rifle plate, from its socket. The WYRM screeched. It reared up, massive jaws snapping, and Terran barely leapt back in time as its head slammed down where he'd just been crouching. Steam blasted from its gills. Fire scorched the rocks. The whole gorge trembled. Kayla shouted from the ridge, firing a second flare near its tail to divert it again. The WYRM turned in fury, its attention locked on her. Terran ran. He scaled the rocks, the burning scale clutched under one arm, smoke and ash clawing at his lungs. The beast bellowed behind him, fire searing the ledge inches from his feet. One slip and he'd be cinders. But Kayla was there, one hand extended, grabbing his wrist and hauling him over the ridge just as the WYRM's tail cracked the ledge like thunder. They hit the dirt together, breathless. The creature, wounded but alive, thrashed in frustration before retreating down into the sinkhole, leaving behind scorched stone and quaking ground. Kayla's breathing was shallow. Her fur was darkened by soot, her lips split, one shoulder burned where a glancing flame had caught her. She looked at the scale in Terran's hand. "You did it," she said. Terran opened his mouth to reply, but then a sound cracked the air behind them. A gunshot. Plasma-based. The rock wall next to Terran hissed and splintered from the impact. Kayla spun, already drawing her coil bow. Terran dropped low behind a boulder. Another shot rang out, too close, too precise. "Sniper," she growled. "Not local. That's off-world tech." Terran swore and checked the scale for damage. "We're being set up. Someone wants this trial to fail." Kayla didn't answer. Her ears flicked toward the ridge. Eyes narrow. Breathing calm again. "They didn't shoot to kill," she murmured. "They want the council to think we cheated." Terran looked at the seared impact mark. "A plasma bolt at a trial site? That's death by dishonor." Kayla's jaw tightened. "Then we proved them wrong." And they ran, not just for survival now, but to reclaim something no weapon could steal, the truth behind the bite, and the bond it had awakened. They didn't stop running until they reached the hollow where they'd first planned their descent. Terran dropped the WYRM scale into the dirt and collapsed beside it, lungs heaving, arms trembling from adrenaline and the weight of survival. Kayla remained standing, scanning the cliffs above with slow, measured breaths. Her coil bow was still raised, her eyes narrow. The scent of scorched stone lingered in the air like a lie that wouldn't fade. "That wasn't a warning shot," Terran muttered between breaths. "That was stagecraft. Someone's trying to paint us as saboteurs." Kayla crouched beside him, brushing her fingers lightly over the impact scorches in the rock. "Plasma bolts leave a distinct signature. Heat traces. And this," she held up a tiny shard of blackened alloy scraped from the rock, "isn't council issue. It's poacher grade. Probably smuggled in through the southern passes." Terran looked at her, sweat streaking through the dust on his forehead. "You think it's one of your own?" Kayla didn't blink. I think someone in the clan wants my bond broken. And I gave them a reason. Her voice was low now. Quieter than he'd ever heard it. Not ashamed, resigned. Terran's chest ached, and not just from the run. Because of me. She met his gaze. No. Because I bid you without permission. Because I chose before they could. He sat up straighter. Then we make them choke on that choice. Kayla tilted her head. You sound more committed than most who've been bonded for years. He smirked faintly. I just hate being lied about. She almost smiled, almost, and reached for the scale. Her hand hovered over it for a second longer than needed, her claws brushing the edge. This is proof. But it's not enough. Terran understood. A clean scale wouldn't matter if the story had already been poisoned by false evidence. The sniper's bolt, the staged attack. Someone was setting the board before they even knew they were playing. He unclipped the tracker module from his belt and turned it over. The sensor screen still flickered with static, but one burst, brief and narrow, glowed in a specific direction. There, he said, pointing toward a ridge northwest. Residual energy. The shot came from across the ravine. Not above. Kayla leaned over his shoulder to see. If that's true, then the sniper staged their perch after the shot. Which means they wanted it to be found, Terran added. To frame us. She stood. Then we find where they really fired from. And we take the evidence back. Terran looked up at her. Blood still stained her shoulder, and ash clung to her fur. Yet she stood like a statue carved for battle, unshaken, unyielding. Lead the way, Kayla, he said. I'm right behind you. The ridge was steep, narrow paths carved by centuries of wind and the cautious tread of night beasts. Terran's boots slipped more than once on loose shale, but he kept pace. Kayla never looked back, yet he could tell she adjusted her stride just enough to make sure he wasn't left behind. The scanner pulsed again in his hand, now locked onto a directional trace, a fading thermal signature with plasma residue interlaced with mineral vapor. He pointed it out, and Kayla nodded grimly. Sniper used high ground to mask the trajectory. It was calculated. Too calculated, Terran muttered. This isn't just some poacher or jealous clan mate. This was someone who knew the trial protocols. Someone who planned for what we'd do. Kayla's voice was quiet as they crept higher. Then they're one of us. They crested the ridge just as the wind shifted, cold and metallic, carrying the scent of ozone and something fainter, smoke. Kayla stopped suddenly and dropped low. Terran followed, peering over a jagged outcrop. There it was. A camouflaged sniper nest, half concealed under a weather-shredded thermal tarp. The firing perch overlooked the ravine perfectly, the same ravine where the WIRM had roared and nearly cooked them both alive. Terran crawled forward, careful not to disturb the setup, and pulled a small shard from a blackened rifle cradle. Fresh, he said. Scorch mark hasn't cooled. Kayla stepped past him and knelt beside the shell casing embedded in the soil. It was a long spike of blackened alloy, tagged with a burn imprint, military grade, off-world forged. Not clan stock. Her expression hardened. Someone brought this here recently. After we entered the trial zone. They didn't fire from this position. Terran nodded. Which means they wanted it to be found. Wanted the council to think we cheated. He turned his scanner to full spectrum and triangulated the thermal echoes between the fake perch and where they had stood during the trial. The real angle didn't match. Shot came from the opposite cliff face, he said. Wide arc traced perfectly to the path we escaped from. Kayla narrowed her eyes. We find that spot. Then we find whoever left the trace. As they turned to descend again, Terran glanced back at the sniper nest. Something about the setup nagged at him. The angles were too clean. The position too convenient. This wasn't just sabotage. It was a message. And someone in this canyon wanted that message to stick like a blade in the back. As they made their way down the trail, he looked over at Kayla walking beside him in the gathering dark. Her silence now wasn't cold, it was coiled, patient. like a hunter waiting for the perfect strike. Terran didn't know who had fired that shot. But he did know one thing for sure. Whoever it was had picked the wrong target. Because Kayla wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was defending them. The path down was steeper, but quieter, shadowed from the moons now, bathed only in the faint orange glow of moss that clung to the rock face like embers. Kayla and Terran moved fast, their boots barely whispering against the stone. The trail felt ancient, worn by years. And now it bore a fresh stain. Blood. Kayla stopped beside a crushed patch of foliage where the glow moss had been scraped away. She dipped 2 fingers into the ground, sniffed, then touched it to her tongue. Her eyes narrowed. Scent markers. Mint resin and gun oil, she said softly. Terran blinked. Gun oil? You're sure? She nodded. Only one clan in the Ridge trained scouts with that blend. House Trevok. My father's bloodline. Terran frowned. So we're talking family? Kayla stood slowly. Her tail had gone rigid. Her ears twitched not with curiosity now, but with tension, an old buried kind. I had a cousin in Trevok. Theron. Brilliant. Respected. Until he was passed over for leadership. Blamed me. She hesitated. He left the territory 3 seasons ago. Or said he did? Terran adjusted the scanner. If he staged this, framed you, then he's not just angry. He's playing deep. Kayla's lips curled in something between a grimace and a snarl. Then we show him how deep the fire runs. They pressed on, following the residual plasma trail until it led them to a high bluff overlooking the ravine. The path had been carefully disguised, but Terran's scanner caught faint heat shadows where old boots had stepped. They followed it to a shaded alcove, where the earth was disturbed and still warm. Kayla crouched, brushing dirt aside until her claws struck metal. A date patch. She lifted it slowly. It was half burned, but the data core remained intact. Terran plugged it into his wrist scanner, and the hollow flickered to life in a static burst. Encrypted logs. Transaction codes. Payment pings tied to an off-world relay. Voice fragments. And coordinates. He looked at Kayla. This is enough. This could prove someone tampered with the trial. Kayla was silent, her golden eyes locked on the horizon where the twin moons now framed the village far below. No, she said. It proves someone did. But not who. Not yet. Terran stepped close beside her, voice low. So what's next? Her answer was almost a whisper. We hunt the liar. Not just to clear the bond. She turned to him fully now, her face barely inches from his. The firelight of her eyes flickered in the dark. But because I will not let them take this from us. Terran nodded, pulse quickening, not from fear this time, but from something heavier. Closer. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. They took shelter in an old storm hut carved into the cliffside, a place meant for scouts during long patrols. The door was a warped slab of sun-baked wood that creaked as Kayla pushed it open. Inside, it smelled of dust, soot, and dried herbs. But it was dry, hidden, and just far enough off the main ridge path to feel safe. Terran dropped his pack and sank onto a stone bench while Kayla lit a glowstone and set it into a notch in the wall. Warm amber light spilled over her fur, casting flickers through the room. She moved with silent precision, always alert, always aware. Only now, in this quiet, did the weight of it all start to settle. Terran pressed a cloth to the cut on his arm where the WYRM scale had nicked him. His hand still trembled. The bite, the trial, the sniper, the lies. It was too much for one day. And yet, he didn't feel regret. Kayla stood across from him, arms folded, tail wrapped neatly around one leg. Her eyes weren't scanning now. They were fixed on him. Not with suspicion. Not even wariness. Something softer. You shouldn't have followed me, she said. Terran looked up. Too late for that. You could have walked after the bite. Left the village. No one would have stopped you. No one would have cared. I would have cared. The words escaped faster than he expected. Kayla blinked. That was all. No reaction. But in the silence that followed, something shifted, some quiet bridge of understanding built between them across the smoke and stone. I've been bitten before, he said, trying to smile. Metaphorically, I mean. Deals gone bad. Partnerships that turned into betrayals. Nothing stuck. This one did, she said. Terran looked down at the fading bandage on his arm. Yeah. It really did. Kayla stepped forward, slowly, carefully, and knelt beside him. She reached out and pulled away the gauze, exposing the twin crescents of the bite, now half-healed, but still raw enough to feel like truth. It marks you, she said quietly. But it also marks me. My choices. My defiance. Then maybe, Terran said, we make it mean something other than defiance. She looked up at him again. And this time, there was no mask. Only Kayla. Tired. Fierce. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with symmetry, and everything to do with presence. I'll finish decoding the data core, he said, breaking the silence gently. If we can trace those payment pings, we'll know exactly where Farron, or whoever, made the drop. Kayla nodded. Tomorrow, we hunt the truth. Terran gave a soft chuckle. We keep saying tomorrow. But we never rest. Kayla shifted closer, close enough that her warmth brushed against his shoulder. Then rest now, she murmured. And this time, he did. Terran awoke before dawn, the glowstone dimmed to embers. For a moment he forgot where he was, until he turned and saw Kayla seated by the door, her coil bow across her lap, watching the horizon as the first sliver of light slipped over the canyon edge. She hadn't slept. You always keep watch? He asked groggily. Kayla didn't look back. Only when it matters. Terran stretched, groaned, and rose, brushing ash and dust from his shoulders. His arm ached, but the bite no longer throbbed with fever. It felt more like a heartbeat now. Faint. Present. Alive. He moved beside her, peering through the warped wooden frame toward the valley. Virelya's twin suns had just begun their ascent, staining the sky in copper and peach. Smoke rose faintly from somewhere far off in the highlands. Tracked the logs last night, he said. The pings came from the hollow spine, a drop point only someone clanborn would know. It's isolated, near the old Trell caves. Kayla's tail flicked once. Then it's Farron. That was his route. Terran glanced sideways. What's his endgame? Kayla was quiet for a long time. Then she stood and spoke as she adjusted the strap across her shoulder. He was supposed to inherit the Ridge Watch post. Said it was tradition. But he didn't see what tradition had cost us, how it kept us stuck. So I challenged. I won. Terran raised an eyebrow. You challenged your own blood? I honored the law, she said, her tone flat. He chose exile instead of service under me. Said I'd betrayed everything. That I'd let outsiders pollute the name. Outsiders like me, Terran said quietly. Kayla turned. Her gaze found his, firm and unreadable. He was wrong about you. That sat heavy between them. Then she moved, grabbing her pack, checking her weapons, tightening the loops on her climbing harness with practiced swiftness. If Farron sold off-world access, he'll be protected. Not just by distance, but by whoever he's working with now. Mercs. Raiders. Worse. Terran slung his own gear over his shoulder. Then we don't wait. We take the proof, and we go straight to him. Kayla's eyes glittered in the light. No, she said. We go through him. And with that, she stepped out into the rising wind, her silhouette cutting a sharp figure against the dawn. Terran followed. Not as prey. Not even as proof. But as her partner, one heartbeat, one fire-marked bond at a time. The journey to Hollow Spine took the better part of the morning. The trail wound through jagged passes and narrow defile where the rocks rose in twisted spires like the ribs of some long-dead colossus. Kayla moved with quiet urgency, the air around her taut like the drawstring of a bow. Her silence wasn't cold, It was calculating. She was preparing for something. Not a fight, exactly, but the wait that always came before one. Terran watched her closely as they climbed. Every motion she made was precise, efficient. There was a kind of deadly beauty in it. And yet, he could tell she wasn't fully focused on the terrain. Her mind was already in hollow spine, already facing the cousin who had turned against her. They reached the final ridge just as the suns cleared the canyon's lip, and the drop point came into view. A makeshift camp. 3 tents, low and dark, huddled against the cliff face. A signal dish had been set up beside a camo-shrouded uplink core, the same design Terran had seen in the encrypted logs. A relay point. Temporary, but functional enough to sell Virelya piece by piece. Kayla knelt behind a jut of stone, her nostrils flaring. "They're here." "How many?" Terran asked, pulling his scope. 3 I can smell. 1 is Farron. The others. She sniffed again. Not clan. Mercenaries. Paid to stand between him and truth. Terran raised the scope and confirmed it. 2 off-worlders. Heavy armor. Plasma slingers. 1 smoked calmly outside the relay tent while the other paced the perimeter. And then. "There," Kayla whispered, low and sharp. Farron stepped out from behind the tarp. Tall, lean, with fur a duller orange than Kayla's. His muzzle was scarred down one side, and he wore a sash marked in old Trevok bone signs. His expression was unreadable as he adjusted the relay dish. Just another day, another betrayal humming in the open air. Terran lowered the scope. "We're not walking into that." Kayla didn't answer. She was staring. Not with hate, but something deeper. Something that reached through childhood fights, clan meetings, silent rifts, and louder scars. This wasn't just a cousin. This was the ghost of every path she had refused to walk. "You said we go through him," Terran reminded her. Kayla stood slowly, coil bow gripped at her side. "We do," she said. "But not loud." Terran tilted his head. "So what? You want to sneak in and—" "No," Kayla interrupted, jaw set. "He needs to know I found him. That I brought the truth. But I'm not going to let him hide behind hired blades." She paused. He will have to choose whether to stand like kin, or fall like a traitor. Terran studied her face, the tension in her shoulders, the tight edge of control in her voice. "You think he'll surrender?" "I think," she said, "he wants to be seen failing. So he can blame me for the ruin that follows." The suns beat harder now, turning the rocks around them into mirrors of fire. And far below, Farron turned his head, just enough to glance up toward the ridge. As if he already knew she was watching. They descended in silence. No drawn weapons. No surprise ambush. Just a long, deliberate walk down from the ridge out in the open, where every step echoed off the stone like a war drum played slow. Terran kept pace at Kayla's side, tension knotting between his shoulder blades. It felt like they were walking into a trial more dangerous than the flame-backed WIRM. There were no rules here. No elder council. No customs to hide behind. Just truth. And what people would do to keep it buried. The camp responded quickly. The pacing merc raised his weapon first, barking something in trade cant, but Kayla didn't flinch. She raised her empty hands, coil bow slung across her back. Her tail flicked once behind her, a gesture of warning, not submission. Farron stepped forward before the second merc could even lift his weapon. His voice was a low growl wrapped in silk. "Put it down," he said to the guard. The man hesitated, then lowered his rifle. Farron turned to Kayla and Terran. "You brought him here." His voice was full of contempt, but also, curiously, satisfaction. "I brought the truth," Kayla said. He smiled without warmth. "Then let's make it official." They followed him into the center of the camp, where the relay dish pulsed faintly with waiting power. Kayla stopped near the edge of the tent, tail steady, arms crossed. Terran unshouldered his pack and pulled out the data drive. The decrypted logs, payment trails, weapon tags, everything. He offered it without flourish, without speech. Just placed it between them like a blade on neutral ground. Farron didn't even look at it. "You're 2 days late," he said. Kayla's ears flicked. "What does that mean?" "It means," Farron drawled, "the buyers already took the second core. This uplink is a decoy now. The real payload's on its way off-world. And when it hits the relay grid, all of Virelya becomes a memory." Terran's stomach turned. "You sold the orbital defense map," he said. Farron finally looked at him then. "Not like a threat, like a footnote. I sold survival. You call it treason. I call it foresight." Kayla stepped forward, fury held tight beneath her voice. "You called it vengeance when you set up the sniper. When you tried to disgrace the bond. You wanted me exiled. You wanted me broken." Farron's smile cracked. "I wanted to remind them that the old laws meant something." "You wanted to be the law," she snapped. "And you failed." The mercs shifted uneasily. Farron's eyes gleamed. "Then prove it. Take me down. In front of them." Kayla reached for her weapon, but stopped. "No," she said. And that no was louder than a shot. "You want blood? Then fight me under right. Clan law. Witnessed. Judged. If you lose, you leave Virelya forever. If I lose, the bond breaks and my name dies with it." Terran stiffened. "You're giving him what he wants." Kayla looked at him, calm and resolute. "No. I'm giving him what he needs, a reason not to keep hiding behind shadows." She faced Farron again. "Do you accept?" The wind held still. Farron's smile faded. And then, he nodded once. "I do." The camp cleared fast. No one spoke, but everyone understood. Something older than any trade deal was about to happen here. Kayla and Farron stood in the ring of bare stone between the uplink and the cliff wall. The two mercs moved back, weapons lowered but ready, watching with wary eyes. Terran stood just outside the circle, fist clenched, the data drive still in his pack. His pulse thudded harder with each heartbeat. This wasn't about who could fight better. It was about who would be believed after. Farron removed his sash and draped it across a jagged rock. "You know I trained for this," he said, voice even. "I won't hold back." Kayla unslung her coil bow and set it down beside her. "You never have. And I've never needed you to." Her fur bristled faintly in the heat as she stepped into the ring. Her claws were half extended, her movements precise, weight balanced like a blade before the draw. No words. No ceremony. Just the ancient laws of the ridge. Blood decides what tongues cannot. Farron struck first. Fast. Precise. His elbow came in low and sharp, meant to knock her back, but Kayla twisted, took the blow on her side, and swept his legs with a back kick. He stumbled but recovered instantly, spinning and driving a knee toward her ribs. They clashed, claws flashing, feet shifting on the gritty stone as they circled, exchanged blows, broke, then crashed together again. Every hit was hard. Measured. Neither one giving room for error. The air smelled of dust and sweat and old fire. Terran had never seen her move like this. Every strike she took, she absorbed. Every blow she landed, she made count. And still, he saw it. The hesitation. Kayla wasn't fighting to kill. But Farron was. He lunged, catching her with a palm strike to the jaw. She staggered, blood blooming from a split lip. Before she could recover, he slammed her into the rock wall, claws at her throat. "Yield," he hissed. "Before I tear your name from their mouths." Kayla's eyes burned. "Then tear it," she rasped. And with a surge of power, she drove her knee into his stomach, twisted out of his grip, and slammed her elbow across his face. Bone cracked. Farron reeled, stumbled, and Kayla didn't wait. She tackled him to the ground, claws pinning his wrists to the stone. "Enough," she growled. Blood ran down her chin. Her breathing was ragged. But her voice was steel. "You lost." Farron glared up at her, lips curled in fury and shame. You think they'll forgive you now? Think they'll welcome him? An outsider with your name on his skin? Kayla leaned closer. They don't need to. I do. She rose. Farron didn't move. The mercs looked at each other, and slowly stepped back. No one interfered. Not now. Kayla stood over Farron, chest rising and falling, blood on her lips and sweat matting her fur. The ring of stone around them was still, except for the faint hum of the uplink tower. Terran approached slowly, unsure what would come next. He expected a final blow, an exile sentence, a snapped command to drag Farron before the council. But Kayla just stared down at him, breathing through grit and restraint. You won't be remembered as the one who fought tradition. Farron spat, slowly pushing himself upright. You'll be remembered as the one who let it burn. Kayla didn't flinch. Let it, she said. Maybe something stronger rises from the ash. Farron laughed, a bitter, rasping sound. You really think they'll follow you after this? No, she said softly. I think they'll watch. And that's enough. She turned her back on him, not in arrogance, but in declaration. The fight was done. Her bond didn't need defending anymore. It had already survived more than teeth and blood. Terran stepped in beside her, gaze locked on Farron. You helped leak a relay code that could cripple this moon's defenses. How long do you think it'll take before the off-worlders show up with booths and contracts? Farron grinned through swollen lips. They're already en route. The core's not here anymore. It's moving through the southern canyons as we speak. Doesn't matter what you prove now. Kayla's claws flexed, but she didn't strike. Terran looked to her. We've got the data. We've got the logs, and the uplink is still hot. Kayla nodded. Then we give the council everything. And we stop that convoy before they sell this moon piece by piece. Behind them, one of the mercs stirred. Look, we didn't sign up for this kind of heat, he said. We didn't know what he was moving. Kayla stared at him. Then help us fix it. Or leave before it breaks you. The merc held her gaze, then slowly backed away, arms raised, expression neutral. We're gone. They vanished into the ridge trail within minutes, leaving Farron behind on the stone, silent and bleeding. Kayla turned to Terran. He doesn't matter anymore. Terran slung his pack forward and activated the scanner. Then let's make sure the rest of this planet does. Kayla took a long breath. Her jaw still trembled from the fight, but there was something clearer in her eyes now. Not pride. Not rage. Purpose. And something more, something that flickered between them like a fuse catching flame. Terran stepped closer. You all right? She nodded slowly. No. I am. They turned toward the trail, side by side. Behind them, the broken path of tradition lay bleeding. Ahead of them, the future burned brighter than it had in generations. They left Hollow Spine at a run. The trail down into the canyon was treacherous, littered with loose shale and scorched roots, but neither Kayla nor Terran slowed. The data logs they carried painted a clear, grim picture. The stolen uplink core was already on the move, headed south, toward the lowland passes where old-world tunnels still connected Virelya's ancient defense grid. If it reached the wrong hands, off-world raiders, black market tacticians, Virelya wouldn't just be vulnerable. It would be sold. Kayla's voice cut through the wind as they bounded down a switchback. There's a shortcut through Black Hollow, she called. Old smuggler route, cuts half a day if we make it through before the heat winds rise. Terran barely caught his breath. Define make it through. Don't stop moving, she said flatly. They crested a rise and paused only long enough for Terran to get a visual. Through his scope, the canyon yawned open like a wound, rust-colored dust swirling at the far end where faint lights blinked in motion. Convo. He counted 3 haulers, flat-rigged with covered cargo beds. One was heavily shielded, the relay core would be in there. 2 escorts flanked them, light hoppers with modular thrusters, fast enough to dodge missile lock, armored enough to survive a bad landing. 3 haulers, armed escort, he muttered. You sure this route's faster? Kayla's claws tapped against stone. Only if we jump. Terran looked at her. She was already moving. They veered off the main trail and dropped into a crevice just wide enough for one person at a time. It spiraled downward, deeper and darker with every turn. Moss glowed faintly along the walls, and the air thickened with heat and the scent of burned minerals. I know this place, Terran said quietly, ducking under a collapsed beam. Smugglers used it to move war salvage during the colony wars. Place is half legend now. Kayla gave a faint nod. My father knew it. Hid here once after his Bond duel. You trust it? I trust me. The tunnel narrowed, and Terran had to crouch to squeeze through. A low hum vibrated through the walls, deep, steady, almost like breathing. Then the wind shifted. Kayla stopped. So did Terran. What is that? She raised her nose, ears twitching. Thermal updraft. That's the heat wind. We're almost out. The tunnel angled steeply now, and Kayla didn't wait. She dropped into a slide, claws guiding her as she vanished into the dark. Terran swore and followed, tumbling in dust and static. They spilled out onto a sun-scorched shelf overlooking the lower canyon, just as the convoy passed below, engines roaring, dust boiling behind them. Terran rolled to his feet, squinting against the rising sun. We're right on top of them. Kayla pulled her coil bow, loading a tracker bolt. Then we don't let them reach the tunnel pass. We take them before the handoff. Terran looked at her. You're not hesitating anymore. Her tail flicked once. There's nothing left to hesitate for. She fired. The bolt arced in a perfect curve, and struck the lead hauler just beneath its axle. The chase had begun. The bolt struck true. The lead hauler bucked violently, its stabilizers flaring as the rig veered left. Dust exploded around its tires, and for a breathless second Terran thought it might tip. But the driver corrected hard, skidding sideways with a roar of metal and sparks. It was enough. Kayla didn't wait for it to recover. She was already sprinting down the ridge wall, sliding in bursts, kicking off stone ledges, using gravity like a weapon. Terran followed, heart hammering, coil bow in hand and knees screaming with each jarring impact. The escort hoppers responded instantly. One broke formation, swinging in an arc above the canyon to get line of sight. Terran shouted, "Cover coming in left!" Kayla dove behind a rock spur just as plasma fire lit up the canyon face, scorching the shale black. Terran dropped beside her, panting. "We need to split them," she hissed. "Get the haulers isolated from the hoppers." He checked his belt, 3 flash charges, 1 pulse mine. "I've got toys. You buying me time?" Her gold eyes glinted. "Always." She bolted from cover before he could say more, drawing the hopper's attention with a full sprint across the clearing. Her body moved like fire wrapped in instinct, tail trailing behind like a flame banner, feet light but deliberate. Terran set the mine on a concave rock shelf and armed it. 10 seconds. He bolted down the canyon's edge toward the convoy, keeping low, keeping fast. The second hopper was circling now, sensors active, searching for threats. Kayla reached the side of the third hauler and vaulted up its rigging with a fluid grace that should have been impossible. She kicked the door open and disappeared inside. A scream followed. Then silence. Seconds later, the hauler swerved again, but didn't slow. Terran rounded a boulder, saw the first hopper descending for a better shot, and dove just as the pulse mine exploded. The shockwave lifted the hopper's tail and sent it spinning, stabilizers hissing in protest. Its pilot fought to recover, and Terran took the opening, leveling his coil bow and firing 2 rounds into its port intake. Sparks burst. It dropped fast, crashed into a pile of rusted slag. Not dead. But not flying either. He didn't have time to celebrate. The second hauler veered toward him. He rolled behind a wrecked skiff just as plasma bolts peppered the stone. Debris sliced across his arm, but he didn't stop. He drew his last charge, activated the emitter, and lobbed it underhand toward the tires. Flash. The hauler's forward axle blew out in a bloom of white-blue light, and the vehicle jolted sideways, crashing into the canyon wall with a metallic shriek. Dust filled the air. Through it, Kayla emerged from the third hauler, dragging a stunned pilot by the collar and hurling him to the ground. "The core's in here!" she shouted. "It's shielded, but it's intact." Terran limped toward her, shoulder bleeding, breath ragged. "Then we end this." She grabbed his hand and yanked him up the hauler's rear ramp. Inside, the stolen uplink core pulsed with faint green light. They stared at it, then at each other. "We take it back?" he asked. "No," Kayla said. "We use it." Inside the hauler, the air was thick with heat and static, and the humming of the uplink core felt more like a presence than a sound. It wasn't just power, it was legacy. Old colonial tech built before Kayla's people were born, before the clans had risen from the ruins left behind. Terran stared at the core's faceplate, a smooth column of alloy-veined obsidian ringed in coated lights. Dozens of hard lines and fiber spines coiled from its base into the hauler's wiring like digital roots. Each pulse in the glass was a heartbeat, ancient, patient, and waiting. Kayla stepped forward. "You said you could trace it?" Terran nodded and dropped to one knee beside the console. "I can do more than that if this thing's still functional." He tapped into his wrist scanner, patched a cable, and started bypassing the ancient encryption. "If the firmware is still tied to Virelya's orbital node, we could use it to see who was connected to it. Full comms logs. Transmission requests. Maybe even remote handshakes." Kayla crouched beside him, eyes fixed on the glowing lights. "What if it's active?" He hesitated. "Then someone's already listening." The interface lit up with a sudden pulse. Not red. Not warning. Green. Connection accepted. "Someone's awake," Terran said softly. "And they just let us in." Data flooded across his wrist display, comms threads, encrypted channels, timestamps. Most were outbound. Silent pings sent toward the edge of the sector. Some returned, acknowledging signal, waiting for coordinates, waiting for confirmation. But one stood out. An active burst signal, 10 minutes old. Routed from this very convoy. Sent to low orbit. Kayla leaned in. "What does it say?" Terran expanded the message and felt his stomach drop. "It's not a sale agreement," he said. "It's a countdown." Kayla's ears went back. "Countdown to what?" Terran's fingers flew across the display, decrypting the headers. "There's a dormant defense platform, Station Virelya. It's still up there. Farron didn't just sell the uplink. He activated a goddamn orbital override." Kayla's voice was ice. "What does that mean?" Terran looked up at her, expression grim. "It means if we don't cancel this signal within the next 16 minutes, an autofire protocol goes live. And the system will treat everything on the surface not registered to the old colonial DNA list as hostile." Kayla's pupils narrowed. "That's the entire population." "Exactly." She stood jaw set. "Then shut it down." Terran hesitated. "I can try. But I don't have the clearance codes. Someone would have to be hard linked into the platform's command node to kill the protocol directly." Kayla was already moving, pacing like a caged ember. "Where is the command node?" "Originally?" Terran exhaled. "In the Echo Spires. 40 clicks east." Kayla's tail lashed. "Too far." Terran's gaze darkened. "Then we stop the signal here. We overload the core. That destroys the logs," she said. "The proof." He looked up at her. "Or we burn with it." Kayla stared at the pulsing machine. And then she nodded. "Then we burn it clean." Terran's hands worked fast. Sweat poured down his face as he bypassed the system's failsafes one by one. The uplink core was designed to withstand battlefield tampering. It was armored, redundant, and vicious. But it was old, and Terran knew old systems better than most. "Manual overload sequence initiated," he said, breath tight. "But once I start the surge, we'll have less than a minute before the power feedback fries the whole rig. No second chances." Kayla stood behind him, coil bow drawn, guarding the ramp. Dust swirled outside, But no movement came from the wrecked haulers. The mercs hadn't returned. Not yet. She looked back at him. Will it stop the signal? He glanced at her. Yeah. It'll melt the core to slag. But it'll fry the logs too. Everything we've gathered. She paused, then stepped forward and reached into her satchel. She pulled out a small secondary data drive. I copied the logs while you were wiring the overload. Terran blinked. I trust you, she said. But I don't bet everything on one fuse. He laughed once, sharp, disbelieving, and full of relief. Remind me never to play cards with you. Kayla offered the faintest smirk. You'd lose. The core's pulse deepened, now red instead of green. A sharp beat counted down the final override sequence. 57. 56. 55. Terran armed the last surge and yanked the cable from his wrist. It's cooking. Kayla grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the side door. Then we run. They sprinted across the canyon floor as the core behind them lit up like a dying sun. Heat washed over them, and a thunder crack of implosion split the sky. The hauler's engine block vaporized. Flame bloomed upward, and the convoy was reduced to shrapnel and dust in seconds. When they finally stopped, gasping at the canyon edge, the silence afterward was deafening. Kayla looked at him. Her fur was scorched in streaks. Terran's jacket was half burned off. You good? She asked. He nodded. Alive. You. She met his gaze, and her voice softened. Finally. They stared at the ruin for a long time. Then Kayla reached out and took his hand. No fanfare. No words. Just a simple truth between them, forged in fire, sealed in ash. Let's go home, she said. And for the first time, Virelya had a future that didn't begin with war, or end with silence.